So, welcome to this episode of Crap No One Tells You. With me today is Mary Griffith Alfarano from Fulton Bank, but she is here in the capacity because she used to be the chairman of the board for a nonprofit called the Laurel House. And she's going to tell us about some of the crap no one tells you about running a board. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Let me just dive right into it.
Okay.
What is some crap no one tells you about running a board for a nonprofit?
There's a lot that people don't tell you about. First and foremost, I think you need to go in there knowing what you want to do and how deep you want to go. You got to know about the mission. To me, that's what drives me, the mission. Some people, it isn't driven by the mission. And I think that's where that little roadblock has occurred in the past for me. So people will go in there and it's to build a resume.
Okay.
So
So they're not going in fully supporting what it is the nonprofit is necessarily doing. They're doing it more because they know they're supposed to.
correct. And in the old school world, because I can say that, you did that. And a lot of the companies did say, okay, we want you to be involved with a nonprofit. We want you to be on a board of directors. We want this, that, or the other thing. So I think there's still some of that mindset out there that I have to do it. But then there's the whole flip side, which would be my perspective, is I believe in the mission and it is my civic duty to help.
Interesting. So is that a shift that is now changing? Are companies no longer telling people to go on boards just to go on boards? Are we seeing boards that are more mission driven now?
I actually see, yes, there's a lot of us companies saying, you know what, we have limited time. We all see it. You probably see it. You're one person, but now you're doing like four people's jobs because of the economy and what we're in right now. But also on the flip side, the younger generation, it is wonderful to see like they're all about their mission. So if they believe in something, be it the green initiative, domestic violence, whatever it is,
Mhm.
they're all in. So that's a refreshing change that I see happening in the near future. And the younger generation, I hate to use that word, but the millennial, the X generation,
Right.
they really are driven by, if they're a green person,
They're driven by the why.
the why.
Yes.
So that's refreshing right now.
Interesting. So I remember I talked to you a few years ago and I said I had been asked to consider being on a board.
Hmm.
And I knew at the time you had been very involved with nonprofit work and been on a board. And I asked you very bluntly, should I do it? And I always remember you looked at me and said, you may be a little too direct to be on a board. And I was like, what? Like, isn't that what you're supposed to do when you're on a board?
Well, I know you, and I've known you for years, and you know me, so I know that's why I'm on here because I'm very transparent and very direct. But that personality sometimes can be considered abrasive, and that personality sometimes can then cause a lot of the old school mission-driven people to feel that we're more direct. That this is the end goal, and I think you and I think a lot alike this way. This is the end goal. This is where we need to be, and I'm going to really work hard. And I am not here really to socialize, and I hate to say not to make friends because I always say to board members, want to have lunch, have coffee, or drink.
Right.
That's over and above the mission that I'm here for. So you and I have talked about this. Especially, I've been a board member, and I've been in every leadership capacity in all
Right.
the
You've
boards.
been on committees.
I've done it all.
Yes.
I've done it all. So I do know the realm of it, but sometimes with our personality, you can be looked as a little bit more pushy. But you see that end goal and you want to achieve that end goal because you believe in that mission.
So it was interesting because there was a guy on here a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking after we recorded the episode. And he's same thing. He is the chairman of a board for I think it's like a Christian school or something.
Mhm.
And they had a guy on the board for about a year or two that was an entrepreneur, like had built several businesses, multimillionaire, very goal oriented, very driven. And they asked him if he would want to be chairman of the board. He told them flat out no. He's like, I cannot function in this environment because you guys are doing the work of a board during board meetings rather than doing the work outside of the board meetings and then just meeting as the board to kind of deal with things or, nail things down. He's like, I just can't function like that. So the guy that was on actually took a ton of notes and he ended up becoming chairman of the board like a year or two later. And he said that was the first thing I implemented. He's like, stop doing the work during the board meetings. Let's do it outside the meetings and just use the board meetings what they were intended for. So me having served, because I did try this once, I served on a committee, which
I can imagine. I can imagine.
it wasn't pretty. And I actually ended up going to the board and saying, listen, I love that everybody's willing to help. And I love the fact that people really want to do this. I'm like, but I spend more time explaining to people why this is a dumb idea than we actually spend getting stuff done. Right. And I think that's part of, and this is just my guess, I haven't run a board, I haven't been that involved with nonprofits, is I think a lot of times you get people with their heart in the right place that really want to help, but don't necessarily bring the skill set needed for what they're looking to help with. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And that's why when you sit on a board, the first thing besides that mission, is it a governing board? Are you going to be a figurehead? Are you going to be making decisions? Or is what I call a roll up your sleeve and a working board? So the majority of the committees and boards were working boards. And I need to make it clear that if you're on a working board, it then becomes a part-time job. And I always tell people if they want to become a board chair, board president, whatever they call it, that becomes another full-time job because you're on and you're responsible and you have a fiduciary responsibility to govern the board. And really, people don't look at it. You take yourself out of that situation. The board and the board president is basically the supervisors and the managers of that nonprofit.
Mhm.
So I found myself doing reviews, doing counselings, doing it. It is exactly the same as a job when you're a board president because you have a responsibility. And we do get caught in the weeds and the minutia. And so that's exactly what Colleen Lilly was my co-president. Her and I decided years ago, some of these board meetings would be 6 o'clock at night, starting with a social time and maybe a meal till 9:30 at night. And I look at your face. I know. So it was a long process.
Right.
But like that person you just spoke to, the first thing we implemented was we cut that time frame down,
Mhm.
a timed agenda. You have to implement a time agenda because then there's sidebars and you've got to say, let's just put this aside for next month. But that person you spoke to is truly correct, is that if you don't have a timed agenda, you don't have a purpose, then you're sitting there in the minutia and the weeds, as I call it, for hours on end. And then what happens is you get people with the wrong skill sets in the wrong seats. And another thing is when you're governing the board, and most boards do have like a governing committee, you should be looking for people to fill those seats and have always a skill set recommendation. So you need somebody from marketing, we need somebody from HR, we need a lawyer, we need a teacher, we need social services. So if you have a mix of that skill sets, then you'll have great collaboration. Otherwise, like you said, you could go for hours arguing about what color we're going to use in the next gala, per se.
Very, very productive time.
Right.
So one of the things that I was always curious about is, let's say we do, you and I are on a board,
Mhm.
fictional board.
Okay.
We want to come up with a fundraising committee. Should we go out and find someone that is, let's say, like really good at sales or really good at marketing or messaging and say, okay, you're going to run this committee and you get to select the people on it? Or do most boards just go, oh, we need a fundraising committee? Does anybody want to volunteer?
So, wait, that's an open-ended question.
Yes, it is.
So, when I was the board person, what we did is we looked around at that skill set and exactly what you said. Who's ran a big fundraiser before? Who has marketing? Who has sales? Who would be that person who could be the chair and the co-chair of that fundraising committee? And then as the board co-presidents, you would tap that person on the shoulder and say, this is why I think your skill set would work. Would you please do me a favor and do it? Because that's a big ask.
Yes.
I mean, running a lot of things. I'm in the midst right now, even though I'm on the honorary chair, honorary council, I'm still running the fashion show. So I know what it's like to have to multitask. And then what I like to do is then allow you, that fundraising chair, and maybe you have a co-chair. I like you to look around the table and say, I need those 4 people to be on my committee. And you should have that capacity and that authority to go tap them on the shoulders and say, hey, you're great at decor. You're great at, getting sponsorships. I have seen it done the other way where it's just a big free for all and everybody raised their hands that I want to do it. And then that's when we get into that minutia in the weeds, is that everybody's treading water. It's getting the right fit and the right skill set.
So you really have to be selective.
Yes, you do.
So I need to backtrack a little bit because I know the nonprofit that you were on the board for, but I can't assume that every person listening to this understands. So the nonprofit you were with wasn't exactly a tiny nonprofit either. Like you guys, that nonprofit is pretty good in size with local nonprofits. It's called Laurel House. Can you just give me a quick, what do they do? How big is the organization? How many board members did you guys have? Just so people kind of get an understanding that we're not talking about, mama's little
Right.
nonprofit in the backyard that has
It's just 5
7
members.
people.
Yeah.
And does 50,000 a year.
Yes.
Right.
So Laurel House is the only comprehensive domestic violence agency in Eastern Montgomery County. So we have been around for I forget the beginning. I'm sorry, 1940s, I think.
Wow.
So we've been around, and we had a group of women, which we call our founding mothers, who actually back then saw a need for women who were in domestic violence situations, believe it or not,
Back in the 40s.
back in the 40s. And here's where I'm going to take my notes out so we don't get off course, because you and I could talk for hours on end. So, it's very easy to say we're the biggest, but not everybody offers what we offer. So when I first came, we did have one shelter, one office,
Okay.
and that was in Norristown. Since then, we have really expanded, and that was during, when I was on the board of directors. We have moved to East Narden. That is our safe haven hub. So that's where we have our counseling. We have group counseling, one-on-one counseling. We have supportive programs. We have resources. We even have legal aid. So we have everything to coordinate care. Our biggest thing is we do have an 800 number, 1-800-642-3150. And the times we are in now, we just brought on, you can text for help. So you can text HOPE, HOPE, to 85511. So that's big because people don't understand, if you're in that domestic violence situation, sometimes it's not easy to make a phone call.
Right.
Or to have the resources to get away. So we now have 24-hour hotline, transitional housing, children's program, group counseling, like I said, medical advocacy, and we have our DART. We are known for our DART. There are our domestic violence response team, 24/7, every day of the year. All we have to do is to be called, and we have a great group that come out, and these are some of the strongest young women that I know. And they go out, they'll meet the police, will ask them to come to the hospital, sometimes to the site of the crime. They are there for everything. So we are over a $3 million organization. We do most of our fundraising through our gala, which is annually. I have the fashion show coming up in October at Pinecrest. We have 2 thrift shops. We have a thrift shop right here at Laurel's Loft in Lansdale. We have another thrift shop, Marion's Attic, over by the King of Prussia Mall. So we have everything that anybody can imagine and all the resources too.
So when you got on the board,
hmm
what was, did you guys have all of those things when you got on the board?
No. So when I got on the board, all we had was our location in Norristown.
Okay.
So honestly, the mission in our heads of Colleen, Lily, and myself were to get them expanded in a safer office environment. We've outgrown our space, so we did help design and get them into the office space now, which was probably quadruple the amount with all the resources that is in East Norriton. And then our final wish was to open a new safe haven to give better services to our victims, our survivors, and thrivers. And that ribbon was just cut this year. We looked 14 years, 14 long years. And I was there, I think, for 9 of them. And we could not find a community that wanted us in their backyard.
Wow.
So we are now in Upper Gwinnett Township. They welcomed us, those board of supervisors welcomed us in that neighborhood with open arms. And it's always tricky because a lot of people said, not my backyard.
Right. Like
Until
I want to help, but just
not here. Right. And it's because you don't think, God forbid, you'll ever need those services.
Correct.
And we also needed to be in a place where you can be part of a community, where there's public transportation, where there's work, where there's school. And, you know, our donors and our supporters and our volunteers, without that team, I know people hate when I say this, there's no I in team. I didn't do this. This team did, the staff, the volunteers. People just stepped out of their comfort zone or just pushed until we got to where we are today.
But do you think one of the keys to being able to do this, and I know there's no I in team, but I'm going to give you a little bit of credit here. If you don't have the right chairman of the board, if you don't have the right board members, there is no way you can do this type of growth, right? Like if you look at any business organization, if you have the wrong management staff, or if you have the wrong vice president, whatever you want to call them, you are ultimately going to limit what that business can grow and what that growth looks like. Doesn't the same thing apply to nonprofits? Like if you don't have the right players in place, so to speak, you're not going to see the type of growth you guys saw.
I agree. You have to have the right team in place.
Correct.
And you know, that's where sometimes our personalities come into play sometimes because you do, you know, see an end goal. And at the ribbon cutting, Beth Sermon, our executive director, who's been with us for almost 15 years now, we spoke at the ribbon cutting and Tammy Reed was there. The Reeds are big supporters of Laurel House. And when Beth spoke, she goes, I'll never forget. Years ago, Mary said, we're going to find a building. We're going to find someone to lend us the money, and it is going to happen. So sometimes that tenacious personality we may have does help force that team and get the right people in that team to get the agency move forward.
So what, having been on a board, if you were taking over a board today, what are the first 3 or 4 people you would try to recruit to that board?
You mean in
Any
skill set?
correct.
The skill
Skill set, personality, like what would be the first 3 or 4 people you would say, okay, I need these skills or these people on my board because I know that'll help drive it forward.
Well, you're going to laugh because you know the field I'm in. Number one is a financial person.
Mhm.
You've got to have someone to look at the financials. Basically, you need somebody to do like forensic accounting and make sure that things are being accounted for correctly so you can grow financially. And you need money to run a nonprofit. So financial would be the first thing. Second would be HR, because that's a whole different skill set today, to make sure that you're following all the policies, procedures, and HR has a different touch than finance does. Thirdly, marketing. Marketing, because if you, and I'm saying this to the king of social media here, is that if you don't have someone that doesn't understand technology and social media, you have a problem, because the generation and the world we live in today is all about social media. And I see that's a huge problem with a lot of the nonprofits today. And then fourthly, I would look for somebody who has those organizational skills that they have done fundraising. So whatever that
Because
is,
that's a whole different animal, the
that's a whole,
fundraising.
it is. And people think, oh, because you're in sales, you can do fundraising.
Nope.
It isn't. It's because there's fundraising, there's fundraising, and then there is asking for large donor money.
Right.
So it's a whole different thing. So they would be the four I would start with. And in Eastern Montgomery County, I can't even tell you how many hundred nonprofits there are. There is a lot.
Oh, yeah. I'm always surprised when we look up the number, because once in a while we pull data of businesses, nonprofits, and but it's amazing when you exclude anything that's under 1 million, there aren't that many left.
Right.
And that's really the key difference is, I mean, I know a handful of people that have started nonprofits that they could have started a business, right? But they decided to start a nonprofit, and they're all multi-million-dollar nonprofits today. Like, for Pete's sake, that's a great nonprofit.
Love it.
I met her when it was, her and half a person working with her. And I remember meeting her and I was like, yeah, she's going to rock this. Like, it doesn't matter. She could have taken on anything and done it. Right. And I think that's the part that often gets lost is nonprofits are phenomenal because they have a really, really good cause, right? Like, nobody starts a nonprofit without having a good cause behind it. The problem ends up being, if you don't have an entrepreneurial or business mindset going into it, it is very hard to have that nonprofit take off. And it has to be run almost like a business or a corporation. Like that. Yes, it has different governing rules. Yes, it has all these boards and committees and all that stuff. And like, I jokingly said, well, if I could run my business with free labor, that would be fantastic. But a lot of times that's what nonprofits have the ability to do. And I don't think they take advantage of it enough. Like, I don't think nonprofits in general are good at going out into the business community and going, oh my God, that's the top sales guy for Comcast. Let me go talk to him. Let me see if he'd be interested in, helping us develop our sales material. Like, whatever it is, I think, because we see it with entrepreneurs too. Entrepreneurs are very afraid to go ask business owners advice or ask them for help. And any business owner you talk to, most of the time will gladly share advice with you, will gladly have lunch with you, will gladly help you out. I think the inability to ask for the help is what holds a lot of nonprofits back too. But I could be wrong on that. I'm not involved in that end of nonprofits. We just do work for them. But that's like the common denominator that I see anytime we get a nonprofit in here is A, they're not willing to spend money to make money. And B, they have the wrong people in the wrong people in the right committees, right? So the committee is a phenomenal idea, but the wrong people are there. And we end up having conversations about something, we're developing, let's call it a flyer for something. And someone gets hung up because there's a hint of pink in it. And I'm like, you're totally missing the entire point of this, right? And that's why I think it's so important, be selective, not just about your board, but be selective about your committees. Get the right people in the right place, just like you would a business. Go ask people and there's nothing wrong with asking, right? What's the worst you're going to get? A no, right? If you've done any type of sales, No is like the most common thing you'll ever hear.
Hmm.
And I think the same thing applies with, because I was asked to be on the committee that I ended up not being on because of who I am. But that was supposed to be one of the fundraising committees or corporate sponsorships. And I remember sitting down and I was like, okay, so we need to put together a $500,000 package. And everybody on the committee and the board was like, you can't ask people for 500,000. And I'm like, why not? If they only give me 100, are you going to complain? They were like, oh. And I'm like, but if I don't have the $500,000 package, nobody's going to give me the 500,000. They were like, oh. And I'm like, yes. Like, don't be afraid to ask. So as far as you guys go, or go, I guess you're still involved.
Yeah, I'm on the honorary council. Yes.
Where do you guys primarily go for your money? Because you need money to function. Like, what are the key money makers for you guys? I know you said you had the gala, you have the fashion show, but there's got to be more revenue than that coming in throughout the year.
Well, a lot of our revenue, obviously, we'd get grants. So we have a grant writer on staff. That's key. Got to have a grant writer on staff because not everybody knows how to write a grant. So, you have to have a grant writer, and then you have to have your program directors. So the program directors will see a need, but they also get your whole area. Eastern Montgomery County is huge. We have a ton of third-party events. So that would mean you decide to have, hypothetically, a party at some venue and they give a percent back. We have a ton of them all the time. I think there's one in Tex-Mex this month that they're giving up proceeds back. So we have a lot of third party. We also, like the gala covers a large portion of our operational expenses. Endowments. People don't realize, like you said, the ask. So you go out and you ask for the $500,000 sponsorship. They say no. Then you roll out the rest. And if it's still a no, well, how about you just give me, an item for the auction?
Mhm.
So there's always some part of that give that you can do. We also go, like you said, to the big Comcast, Pico, all of them and ask.
Professional sports teams,
Right.
people don't realize they donate a ton of money.
Right. But sometimes they have their causes, so that's a hiccup. Like the Eagles are all about being green and autism.
Right.
But we have a connection, and like I said, the Reeds when they were here were phenomenal. They've been phenomenal even in Kansas City.
Mhm.
So, but they are part of our mission. So the money can come from all different revenue sources, but you've got to have the right people, like you said, in the right seats to do the ask. I was never afraid of doing the ask. We actually would go to people's homes and have a sit down conversation. Like people, also, you need to look at who's coming to your events, who's supporting your ideas. Go to them one on one, explain your mission. We are just coming off and finishing a great capital campaign, and that was run by one past president and now board member, Dee Dee Scott. She ran an incredible capital campaign. And to get that building, yes, I may have helped purchase it,
Mhm.
but then you have to fit it out.
Oh, yeah.
ADA. You got to have an elevator. And I'm like, an elevator? We need an elevator at 800,000. So that's also a way to raise money. Who wants to sponsor the elevator? Who wants to sponsor a room? We have room sponsors at our shelter. So above the room, it will say this room is dedicated by whatever.
Okay.
So there's a lot, you have to be creative. And I think that's where that marketing person on our board and then that fundraising person on the board can work hand in hand on raising those funds. But it all gets stuck into what you and I say, it's a business. Nonprofit is no different except for the mission
Mhm.
is it's a business. It needs to be run like a business to be forward thinking.
Right. So, speaking of forward thinking, mission and vision and stuff for businesses and nonprofits doesn't change a lot, right? Like that's the why of what they do.
Correct.
But I'm assuming there are other things that kind of change and evolve over time within the nonprofit, right? So like how operations work, what services you want to offer, what you may want to expand upon. Does that become a board issue, or is that something else?
So that should be, it goes hand in hand. It would be your program director. So if you're looking at the things you offer, the programs or things you want to expand, whoever is in your paid program director position, if you have that, should be looking at that and thinking, seeing what's new, what needs to be changed, and then it should be then forwarded to the board for one of the very concise discussions of the board meeting. And that's what I always say when you get off track, when you have an agenda, yeah, consent agenda should be in there. I know a lot of boards don't use consent agenda. So you're getting that whole packet. A board should get that packet a week ahead of time. Read through everything, agree with your consent agenda. If you have any problems on your consent agenda, and a consent agenda can have all your board reports, your ED director report, you're reading all them. If there's something in that consent agenda you don't agree with, you were to reach out whoever submitted that report. Iron those details out. So when you have that board meeting, those paid people can say, hey, this is a new idea, or this is what we need to be doing. And for Laurel House, it's a very sensitive topic, and we have to, show discretion. So that's an important topic. But those big decisions, that's why you have a paid ED and a paid staff. And then they need to come forward, and it needs to be placed on a board agenda because the board needs to be aware of it. I will say, when you talk about things you should know, there is nothing worse than you being at a public event or publicly speaking and someone bring up something that has transpired in that organization and you have no idea of what they're talking about. For a board member to be blindsided, to me, is like a kiss of death, because then you're not doing your responsibility because you don't even know what's going on. So note to self, if you're on a board, make sure there's that transparency and that communication.
That nobody is doing something off to the side that you weren't aware of.
Right. Or it can be as innocent as there's some kind of fundraiser, or somebody got acknowledged for an award or something, and you be caught somewhere and say, oh, so and so did this, or oh, I heard you got a grant for this amount of money, but you as an acting board member are clueless. A little bit embarrassing.
Yeah, I can totally. So it's really being fully aware of everything that's going on within the organizations if you're on a board.
Yep.
Interesting. So you said it's a part-time job. It sounds like a full-time job.
It's a part-time job if you're on a working board. Laurel House is a working board, but when I would interview, and yes, I say interview candidates to be on the board, it is a process. The process is we speak one-on-one. Then we have a second follow-up meeting with at least 2 people from the governance committee. Once we're all on board, I ask for your resume. Boy, it does sound like a job. I ask for your resume just because I need to see your skill set.
Right.
We just brought somebody on last year from social services. In all the years at Laurel House, we didn't have somebody. Well, that was a miss. So then you bring those resumes forward to the board, and then the board has to vote. So it's not like an automatic that you raise your hand, I want to be on the board. It is an interview process, resume process, and a decision because the skill sets have to fit. Not all boards do that. Believe me, I know that. This is a big organization, a successful organization. I have sat on other boards where it's just a figurehead. You go to your meetings, you say yes, no, vote, have a board topic, and it's done in an hour and a half. So you need to pick and choose what you want out of a board and what you can give to the board, meaning of your time and talent.
Yeah, because it's a part-time job if it's a work.
And we're short on hours right now. And I mean,
Yes. Okay. Anything else you think people should know before we wrap it up?
Well, I just think personally, I feel, and this could be my my infomercial, is that everybody has something to give. And we all have time, talent, and some people have money to give. And in this world we live in, I think we do have a little bit of lack of civility at some times. And maybe we could be kind and find something that gives you passion or it gives you just a feeling of a sense of belonging. So I urge everybody, even if you don't want to be on a board, go volunteer. And I'm like, I've been in my past the queen of volunteering. Um, and my family is the family of being voluntold. I'm sure you know what voluntold means. They're told that they're going to be here with me, and that's it. But it does give you fulfillment, and it does give you appreciation to what we have in our life.
I think it also gives you a much better understanding of the community you actually live in.
Correct.
So, well, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for
And
having me.
I am sure we will bring you back for some other topics later on.
Thanks,
So,
coming.
thank you, everyone, for listening.